Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Liberation is Lit podcast, where the power of storytelling meets the force of social change. I'm your host, Taylor Simon, and in this podcast, we believe in the profound impact of stories. And I am here today with poet and author Terrence P. Elmore. I'm so excited to talk about all things poetry and how he is changing the narrative with his poetry. So, hey, Terrence, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for having me on.
Yes. So to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as a writer and a poet and what subjects you're really drawn to writing about?
Okay, so where do I start? So, long story short, I had stopped writing poetry for about, man, might have been around 10 years. And when I say writing, I mean like physically writing them out. Like I would always construct a poem in my head, like, okay, that's cool. But I, for whatever reason, stopped writing them out. And my wife, she wasn't my wife at the time. She challenged me to actually write out a poem. And so once I did that, I got back into the groove of writing. And I was like, you know what, this would be pretty cool if I was to publish a book. And the concept I was thinking of when I was writing, because I got into doing like a couple of poems with like a series. And I was like, it'd be pretty dope if I did like 10 poems that kind of went from like the beginning of life, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, passing on. And then it just grew into something else. And the subject matter I had for that particular collection of poems is love. Because at that time I had been, I would say, frustrated with like social media, the narrative on social media, the narrative with reality TV and different things. And everybody was seeming to be upset with love. It was like, love is all these horrible things. And I'm like, no, it's not. Like, love is a beautiful thing. And, you know, if you were hurt by somebody, you were hurt by that person. You were hurt by love. And so that was the message I wanted to get over to people. Like, it's not love that hurts you. It's the people who misrepresented and mishandled love that hurt you. And so, I was like, I want to put that out there because I want people to know that love is just all this beautiful stuff. And then you don't hear black men or men in general talk about love. So I was like, this is a conversation that really need to be had because it's not seen. And then that going back to what I was seeing, negative stereotypes of us and these conversations, like we don't like each other, like black men and women can't get along and all these, it wasn't as bad as it is now. It was more so like social media conversation, but now it's like highlights from podcasts where these wars are going on. And that's just not how it is. So that's where that first book started. And then the second book, The Essence of Love. Well, first book is called Love Letters, a collection of poems. And then my second book, The Essence of Love, it was kind of like a continuation of the first book, just expanding on love and showing all the beautiful things about love. And in that book, I put like someone writing a letter to love. And so the idea was at the beginning, it's like somebody saying they don't believe in love or they were hurt or things like that. And then the poems are supposed to show that it's not all these negative things. And then at the end, it's like love saying, here was the example. And so in between that time, I needed to let people know that I wrote poetry because it wasn't something I talked about. Not that I was trying to hide it, but it just, if it didn't come up in the conversation, I never talked about it. So a few people knew that I wrote poetry. So I started a blog to get it out there. And then people were like, so you were writing poems all the time? I'm like, I mean, conversation didn't come up. I wasn't trying to hide it, but, and one of my cousins told me it was just probably because I'm a humble person and I'm just laid back when it comes to certain stuff. So, I didn't feel the need to brag about it. I was like, well, I can see that. So I created the blog, let the people know I'm still writing the blog every Wednesday to this day. It moved from love poems to more like inspirational poems or something to get you through the week. And so that's where the blog is now. My current book, paint is not only paintbrush, I started thinking like, you know, like from the feedback I was getting with the first couple of books, well, the first two books, like I said, guys talking about love and stuff. It's like, I'll buy your book, but I'm not gonna read these love poems. I'm like, why not, man? You buy the book, you might as well read it. And so I was like, I really don't have anything for the fellas. So I began to have like this concept of having a book that was, I guess you say, focused on men, but anybody could enjoy it. And then during that time, the pandemic happened, George Floyd murder happened, and so many other things were spotlighted. And so the book kind of shifted in a way to be more of a light. So that's why the title Paint is Not Our Only Paintbrush. It comes from saying that our stories are not always these traumatic stories or these painful stories, because that became the narrative. I mean, when you look at movies and stuff, the popular movies or the slave movies or the help movies, civil rights things, and not saying that we don't need to know about those type of things, but we have other stories that can be shared and that people can see. So the concept was, let me write some poems that everybody can enjoy, but it's our stories and it's told through the eyes of a Black man. So it's like, that's where paint is not only paintbrush. Like, we have different stories. We paint different stories. We love, we laugh, we cry. And in it, I wanted to focus on the first couple of poems you'll see is just dedicated to conversation with men. I've had some conversations, of course, over the years, and it's just different things that we think about and deal with that I don't think a lot of people really notice. And so I wanted to try to make it comfortable to kind of have those conversations. So that's where the current book comes from.
I think it's so interesting. Well, first, let me say that when selling my own books, I'm like super humble to I mean, I talk about them a lot more, but my grandmother, she never pronounced the H in humble. She'd be like, "Oh, I love your meek and humble spirit." And I really internalized that as to like not celebrate all of the things that I'm doing and that I'm proud of. So I love how you found the outlet of your blog and your podcast, which is called the Brown Sugar Cafe, by the way.
Yes,
And
yes.
I love how you wanted to have this outlet to talk more about your poetry, but also just continue to gift the world with your writing and your words. And the second thing I wanted to say was it's so interesting that you said men wouldn't want to read your love poems because the books when I you can get all 3 of the books from Liberation is Lit, by the way, but I'll link all of those in the show notes, but I feel like the books that men are drawn to the most when I'm selling your books are love letters and the essence of love, and they're like, "Ooh, what is this? Ooh, what is this? A man writing about love." And I think that's so interesting that because I didn't know the backstory about pain. Pain is not our only paintbrush being like something more accessible for men. So I definitely want to get into that. How would you describe men's relationships with poetry and literature more broadly, and your personal views and your opinions about kind of the role of poetry and literature within masculinity as a whole?
And, to your point, I think it's just the timing, because back then there weren't these conversations about love and embracing love and self-love. And I don't think it really became a conversation until the pandemic. That was one of the few good things that came out of that, is that people were being more self-aware. Like, men were being more self-aware that we can't sit here and compartmentalize a lot of stuff and it doesn't blow up in our faces eventually. I've had some conversation with people who had to go to therapists during that time because it was recommended to them either by loved ones or by employers. So they discovered some the stuff about themselves that they didn't really realize. So it doesn't shock me that now that it's being well received, because we're in a space where it's talked about more and it's more comfortable. When it comes to literature, I just think that now we're finding more things that everybody can enjoy. I know like reading growing up and stuff, just depends on what type of books you liked or what type of readings and literature that you like. It kind of shaped where you were as an adult as far as like picking up books and things. Cause we were kids, we picked up like action books or mystery books and things like that. And then you get into those grades where you have assigned reading and it's stuff you don't want to read. And I know for me, that kind of dampened, like the experience of reading because it's like, I don't want to read these things. Like I was in eighth grade and one of the assigned readings was The Diary of Anne Frank. And that just wasn't interesting to me. And the teacher tried to make it cool. And she was like, oh, well, you get to read a girl's diary. And I'm like, but I was taught not to do that because that's personal. So that's not exciting for me. But I think that, in my personal journey with literature, I fell in love with poetry at a young age. I fell in love with poetry at elementary school when I learned about the Harlem Renaissance and I learned about Langston Hughes. And I just thought it was just really dope. I was like, man, like poetry is, because I had been writing before then, but I was like, poetry is really where it's at. Like, I'm digging poetry. And so I've gotten into poets and things over the years. And I think my favorite, no, I don't even say I think, my favorite books to read are poetry books. I'm trying to get back into fiction because I've developed this thing and that I wouldn't say I don't read for fun, but I'm always trying to learn something. So most of the books that I've been reading the last couple of years have been like books where I get information. And so I did purchase a few fiction books. I haven't read them yet, but I'm planning on it. But like I said, when I get poetry books, I dive right into those. Matter of fact, I recently got your poetry book and I'm reading that. I don't, when it comes to poetry, I don't like to kind of speed through it. I like to read a couple of poems, let it digest, come back to the book. Some people can do it in one sitting. For me, I just like to spread it out. I like to really just digest what I'm reading because sometimes I even go back and read poems over before I move forward. One of the fascinating things that I found out about poetry, and I didn't even think about it, but it made complete sense. Jason Reynolds was talking about how poetry made reading fun for him because it was little bite-sized pieces. Because it's crazy that he was a person who didn't like to read and look at him now. I mean, so it just goes to show you like if you have that right experience or if something grabs your attention, especially with reading, man, the possibilities are endless. And then when you create something like you write a book or you write a poem or an essay, a short story, and you share that with people, you're inspiring people. And that's something I didn't know. Like when I first published my book, I just wanted to get out there and show people the other side of love. I didn't expect the feedback that I was getting and how people were saying that, I've even had people say that the book made them believe in love again. And some people say it made them see that love was possible where they didn't believe it was possible. And I was just like, wow, that wasn't something I was thinking of. I was like, just get it out there. Whoever needs it will find it. And that's what happens.
And that makes a lot of sense. And that's part of the reason why I started Liberation is Lit is because I was different. I found what I wanted to read outside of the classroom. I hated reading for class,
Yeah.
but I found what I wanted to read outside of the classroom. But it wasn't until grad school in high school, I read Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Push by Sapphire. I read Black books, but that wasn't what I mostly read. And I think with Black men and boys, especially, and what you said about reading for class dampened the reading experience. I feel like Black men and Black boys don't have a lot of, or it's harder to find those books that reflect their experiences. And that's why I love recommending Jason Reynolds, and Max Kendi has been doing more for younger readers, and with Walter Dean Myers,
Mm,
and all of these books where Black boys are the center of the story. Because yes, there's a lot more books about Black girls out there, but finding books about Black boys and for them to see themselves in the story is really important too. And just experiences that they like to read. And I feel like in school, we might get a couple poems or two from Langston
yeah,
Hughes,
Mike.
but we don't get a lot of that experience.
Yeah, and
So
another thing about school I was thinking about as you were talking, when I like William Shakespeare was not really exciting to me. It wasn't until we got to Othello where my interests were piqued. And right there, see, it's just like, oh man, okay, so Othello, okay, African, okay, let's find out about this. So to your point, yeah, if you see some representation in there, it'll draw your interest.
and that's why I think it's so important to really put that representation out there. And I always make sure to have that. I know Jason Reynolds has done a ton of books. And I didn't know that about him not liking to read. And
Yeah.
yeah, he's got a ton of books out there. And that's why I'm always recommending those books and using reading for fun, and not just like, oh, you on punishment. Let me take your phone. Let me take your laptop and you go read a book. Having reading being fun and a part of the family experience is really
Yes.
important too.
Yes. I have an uncle, and I always find this story fascinating when my mother told me. He's my oldest uncle, and she said that when he was younger, like he liked to read so much that he would sneak and read, like when he was supposed to be going to sleep, he would be reading. And I always thought that was so cool. I was like, of all the things you could be sneaking to do, you're sneaking to read.
Yeah, I was that person too. Sometimes it was so bad. Sometimes my book was so good. My friends would ask, "Oh, you want to go to the movies or something?" I'm like, "Hey, I gotta babysit my little sister." But meanwhile, I just want to stay.
So,
So yeah, I
hey,
would get in trouble for reading in class.
oh
It
yes,
was
I know
bad.
people like that too. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I mean, there are worse things to, like you said, to get in trouble for.
Right.
So what kind of keeps you grounded in this work? I know you talked about the pleasant surprise of the feedback you got from people needing to read this different narrative when it comes to love. So, what kind of keeps you going and grounded in this work as a writer and a poet?
Honestly, it's just, you know, if I don't do it, then who will? It's kind of that mentality. And if I don't do it, who's missing out because I don't? Like, I've contemplated stopping my blog, but it seems like the times I have, somebody reaches out and say, "Oh, I enjoy your blog," or they'll comment on a post, and I'm like, "Oh, y'all are still here, bro." And that even developed into a podcast. I just took that even further, and I think what also keeps me grounded is when it comes to that sort of thing is talking to other poets and writers and have a conversation. And I'm always getting something from those conversations as a reminder for me. It's like, wow, I didn't know I needed that. But just having that conversation and that encouragement to keep going is like, you know what? I was thinking about, because I started a Substack, which I was going to use to replace my blog. But over time and thinking, and then one of my friends reached out to me because he saw a post and he gave me some good feedback about it. He was like, why not just do both? I was like, you got a good point. So it's like just having those conversations and being open about it. I always recommend people, if you don't have like a like network or community, at least find one other poet or writer to have a conversation with. It makes a world of difference because you can talk to, I talk to my wife about everything. She gives me good advice on things, but when it comes to like writing and poetry, having those conversations with other writers and poets, it's like you have these moments where you're talking, it's like, oh man, that makes sense. Or even when people reach out to me and ask me for advice, I'm finding some information in what I'm telling them, and I'm like, man, that sounds, you know what, I need to be doing that too. So it's just having the community and having people around you can have conversations with.
And so I know you have your hands full with your podcast and your blog and everything. Do you have any upcoming projects that you want to share about?
I want to share because I want some ability. Working on a book. I don't know if it's going to be a novel, a novella, or I even at one point thought about trying to make it a comic book. But I also, outside of writing and things, I love to grill. And so I do barbecue content and I have a barbecue podcast with some other guys. Uh, and one day I came up with the concept of having a story that's kind of tied into barbecue, but then it's a story of like a coming of age, but not really a coming of age. It's like almost like a later in life coming of age. Because the concept of it is father who owns a barbecue place. He has two sons. Something happens to his brother. He immediately goes and spend time with his brother. The two sons who used to work in the barbecue place, they run it while the father is gone. They each have their own jobs and stuff, but they're successful enough where they can do this on the weekends and they're not cutting anything. And so during that time, they learn stuff about their father through having conversations with their mother. And then the father going to see his brother, they have conversations with each other. They learn things about each other because the business was passed down to them from their father. But the brother who left, it was almost like a rebellion type of thing. And so it's so many different when I got to the character development, I was like, wow, what am I doing? Because there's so many different stories happening at once. So that's what I'm currently working on and just trying to figure out how to go with it. That's the major thing. And then I have two poetry books that I have the concept of that I want to get out. Every poetry month I participate in this poem a day challenge from the Reader's Digest. I've been about 3 years, I think, something like that. And so I had an idea just to put them all in, like go back and rework them and put them all in the book and call it like challenged or something like that. I probably work on the name, but and then I have another poetry book idea called Legacy because I realized, even though some of my poems had some personal feelings, but they all don't have like specifically personal things to me. Some of them are conversations I've had with people. And so I want to do some poems that are personal, like pertaining to my grandparents, things growing up. So that's another idea I have. So those are three things. And I think, I think because the book I'm writing is different is why I'm slower with it. And I think I use that as like some sort of self-sabotage when I like jump to do some poetry stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, I got some poetry stuff to do. But it's like, no, you should really be working on this book. And matter of fact, I know that's what it is. It's like the poetry, you're comfortable with that. So you're just going to keep jumping back to that. And you may be touching this book, but you're not touching it as much as you could be because you're saying that you have to do these poems, even though you have notebooks and note apps and different things with a ton of poems that you really could use for anything. So that's what I'm working on and working through.
I definitely feel that because I have been writing my concept for my novel for the last 2 years, and I am not making much progress on it because poetry is comfortable.
Yeah. And see how many
And
books have you come out with since then?
it's been three poetry
See?
and yeah. And then I started working on another book and not working on my novel because like again, my comfort is if I'm not doing poetry, it's like essays, nonfiction style. So that is why I'm like, why can't I just sit down and write this novel? Because it is a different part of my brain, and sometimes it's easier to go with comfort.
Yeah, we have to hold each other accountable.
Definitely, definitely. And then my last question is, what advice would you offer listeners who want to make a positive impact in their community?
Don't be afraid. First of all, do some research, find out where you can help. It doesn't have to be the whole community at one time. It could be one person. You can start with one person, whatever you want to do, and start from there. A lot of times we want to help everybody and we just jump in without really thinking about it. And it's like you have to start somewhere. So starting with one person is fine, and then you can expand. You could either, help somebody who's already doing something that you want to do, or sit with them, shadow them, because once you get started, you may find out that that's not your thing. You may have to go find something else that's your thing. But I say just start, do the research, talk to people who are actively doing what you want to do, and find out. We hear a lot about people who grew up wanting to do a certain thing, and once they started, they were like, oh no. Like I had a classmate who wanted to be a nurse. He was like, she was gonna be a nurse, and all through grade school, nurse. And she saw blood and she was like, this is not my thing. So it just it just depends. So I say just, start somewhere, find people who are doing what you want to do, connect with those people. Another thing I love about like community and people who are doing things, my experience, they're easy to talk to. If they know you want to help people, whatever, that's like, oh, okay. And they'll guide you the right direction. They might even, if you volunteer to help them, there might be some opportunities for you there. You probably don't even have to start it. You probably could just help what they're doing and get the same results that you want to see.
Yes, definitely connecting to community. That's like a thread that we've been talking about today. So thank you so much, Terrence, for being on the podcast and having this amazing conversation. Where can people keep up with you and your work and keep updates for these books that are coming out?
First of all, thank you for having me on again. I really appreciate that. If you want to reach out to me, you can catch me at the Brown Sugar Cafe on all socials. My website is thebrownssugarcafe.blog. My books can be found on my website. My podcast, the Brown Sugar Cafe podcast, is available on all podcasting platforms. What else? If you're into barbecue, my content is on Instagram. Facebook is twdub.bbq. On YouTube is twdub-bbq. I have a Substack monthly newsletter. It's substack.com/Terrence P. Elmore. I think I'm saying that right. And I believe I've covered everything. Sometimes I leave things out, but just hit me up if you have any questions about anything. Hit me up.
Yes, and I'll link all of those in the show notes, in the description, and everywhere so you can have access to those links. Thank you so much again, Terrence. And thank you, listeners, for being part of the Liberation is Lit podcast. If you have stories you want to share, want to suggest topics, or just want to connect, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Liberation is Lit, or visit our website, liberationislit.com. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider leaving a review. And remember, your voice matters. And together, through the lens of stories, we're going to make a difference in the world. Until next time.